I'll go ahead and start doing kind of a gentle intro here. So my name is Emily Cicchini, and I am the executive director of Bookspring in Austin, Texas, and I am the acting president of the steering committee of the National Book Access Association, which is a sponsored project of First Book. And we just launched this year. As of this morning, we have 171 registered members, which is pretty exciting. We know a little bit about the membership so far, that they're really from all over the country, have people from all over the country. The average number of books from organizations that are reporting that are distributed each year is 220,000 books per organization that's been in that are registered right now with members. So we've got lots of things cooking for the National Book Access Association. We have a wonderful conference planned for February 15th and 16th, the 2 days after Valentine's Day. And this is another chance for this group of people who give away books, who gift books, who distribute books to populations that don't have access to books, that don't have ready access to books, that are in book deserts, who are low income, who otherwise are not able to have the rich access to books that they need to become literate people, to become literate families, children, adults. And it's so exciting to be pulling us who do this work together through the National Book Access Association. And okay, we've got 10 people in the room now. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to introduce Molly Ness, Dr. Molly Ness. I have just been an incredible fan of Dr. Molly Ness's since she started the End Book Deserts podcast. And if you haven't heard, we are in collaboration formally with the End Book Deserts podcast. We have them kind of cross-promoted right on our website there. And I know I was talking to a member last week who was like so excited that all those podcasts were right there, Molly. So thank you for that body of work. She's also a very accomplished academic researcher, well-published, and just an advocate for literacy and books and reading. She is currently with Learning Ally, which is a national organization that I'll let you explain a little bit more what they do, Molly, if that's appropriate. But we're really here to celebrate her new book, The Power of Read Alouds. And I know, even though we're book distribution organizations, I know Bookspring Read Alouds is a huge part of our method of when we do a book gifting event. Somebody's going to read a book out loud. That's like 90% of the time that happens. So we do lots of trainings on how to read aloud, how volunteers should feel comfortable. We do a parent book club, which is all about helping parents feel more comfortable to read out loud. So that's why I was so excited about the nature of your new book, Molly, and just can't wait to hear more about what you found, what you're thinking, and what your thoughts are on this right now.
Well, thank you for having me. And thank you to all of you who are doing the work that I came into probably 5 or so years ago when I heard the statistics around book access, that 32 million American kids lack access to books in their home schools or communities, and felt like people weren't talking about this enough. So created this podcast. I think there's now about 50 or so episodes. Obviously, the National Book Access Association is working closely with First Book. 2 weeks ago, I was in Columbus, Ohio at the National Council of Teachers of English Conference, and First Book was there with the Big Rockin' School Bus. The Busload of Books tour. The Busload of Books tour, this crazy author-illustrator team who spent, with support of First Book, spent an entire year living out of a school bus, not like a big school bus, one of those sort of condensed school buses. They drove to Title I schools in all 50 states. They didn't take the bus to Hawaii, they just went to Hawaii. And in this bus, as if they weren't crazy enough to live out of this bus and give out 25,000 books with support of First Book, they had their 4 children and 1 dog, all living out of this bus, all working to bring books and awareness around book access to schools, Title I communities, and they actually collected some really amazing data that is being investigated and disaggregated and such. And so you can listen to the follow-up podcast, which was just posted about 2 or 3 weeks ago on the End Book Deserts podcast. So I think of myself as a teacher of teachers or a traveling teacher. I like to work with teachers and literacy programs to make everything we are doing as effective as possible to build reading culture and to translate data and science to those on the field, on the ground, either in classrooms or in literacy centers across the country. And that's what brought me to this, this particular writing of this book. So let's see where we're going today. In the next 50 or so minutes, I'm going to talk about the benefits of Read Aloud. Some of the information will be old news to you, but some of it will be new and really interesting stuff because I get chills when I talk about the physiological benefits of Read Alouds, what the science is now showing. We're going to talk about patterns and trends with regard to read alouds. And chances are, if you read the paper, you're in the literacy community, you have heard about this buzz about the science of reading. So we'll talk about how read alouds fit into the science of reading. And then knowing most of you are working in literacy centers or communities or book access, I really wanted to share some ideas to help you turnkey how to maximize the power of read alouds. So there'll be sort of 5 ready to go things that you can try out, turn to your team and share out later today. So let me actually start with a quick video. If you're not aware of the resource of readaloud.org, it is from pediatric science. John Hutton is at Cleveland. I can't remember if it's Cleveland Children's Hospital or Cincinnati Children's Hospital, but let me just share this quick video with you. Give me 2 seconds, pull it up. And again, this comes from readaloud.org. Oops. Hold on, my Zoom is being a little slow, so I apologize for that. Here we go.
Remember what big eyes you have, she said. All the best to see you with, my dear. That's the wolf. What are you doing? Okay. Research says reading from birth accelerates the baby's brain development. And you're doing that now? Oh, yeah, this is the starting line. Hush. When this is over, oh, of course, baby, of course. Yeah. Yeah, baby, you are doing great. High five.
It's never too early to start. 15 minutes a day exposes your child to millions more words, giving them a head start in school and life. Read aloud every day.
Scarcely had the wolf said this, then he was out of bed and swallowed up. Oh. Yeah? Then he was out of bed and swallowed up Red Riding Hood.
All right, so obviously, you know, some comic relief in that, but what we do know is that the science is pretty compelling about the importance of reading aloud from the get-go. So we often hear that kids who are read to sorry about that. We often hear that kids who are read to from the get-go outperform their peers who are not read to. And so I actually want to show you some of the data around this because, again, it is pretty compelling. So Let's look at this research from an Australian researcher, Margaret Murga. So what you see here is data disaggregated by the frequency of read alouds. They qualify them as read alouds at home. And you can see what I tried to circle in my really bad red penmanship was the difference in academic levels, cognitive skills, according to the frequency of read alouds. And I should say that any of the research that I share today, if it exists behind a paywall, an academic paywall, and you need it, send me an email. I'm happy to violate copyright laws and send it to you. I always say, don't turn me into my sister, who is a copyright lawyer, but I'm happy to share any of these studies and such as PDFs. So when I talk about a read aloud, I want to be really clear that I am talking about a shared experience between a child or group of children and an adult, either an adult that is a parent or caregiver, or an adult that is a literacy volunteer, or an adult that is a classroom teacher. And what I want to make really clear is that the ping pong, the volley and serve of language is really what makes the read aloud as rich and powerful and impactful as it could be, because it's that conversation and engagement. It's not a one-way street of language delivery. It's that ping pong. And if you're not familiar already with this organization, I always blank on the name of it, what the acronym stands for. But if you Google Lena, you can find it. So I want to show you some work that this organization that is all about starting early, the importance of early talk and early language development promotes. So during the pandemic, they put these little talking pedometers on babies. And these pedometers, you can see in this little vest that this cutie pie is wearing, what they do is they measure the ping pongs, the conversational turns. So they don't necessarily measure the number of words, measure that back and forth interaction of language. And what we found is that our kids who were babies, toddlers, preschoolers at home during the pandemic had less of that language volley and serve. I'm a parent, I get it. During the pandemic, when I was at home with my kid juggling, dirty laundry and Zoom school and my work, was my language interaction as rich as it could be? Probably not. But I raise this because when we talk about the impacts of the pandemic, those kids who were babies and toddlers and preschoolers during the pandemic who had less oral language interaction as quantified by Lena, those are now our kindergartners and first graders and second graders. And if oral language is the bedrock of literacy, we have to start to think about what that means long-term for our students' literacy development. So when I talk about the benefits of read alouds, most of these are pretty well known, that kids who are read to are more likely to see themselves as readers. They're more likely to associate reading as a pleasurable activity. They're more likely to see themselves as readers who then engage in independent reading. We know that kids who are read to have more sophisticated vocabulary. They have higher comprehension skills and higher order thinking skills. We know that read alouds are particularly beneficial for students who have language struggles, either because they have a language development issue or because they are a language learner themselves. And you can see, again, some of these citations, again, happy to share with you. They're all really recent. I try to stay up on research as much as possible. So recent citations. We also know that there is a reciprocity between oral language and a read aloud and students generating their own written language, that read alouds serve as a model and a springboard for independent reading. And when we get into conversations about the science of reading, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of background knowledge and how much background knowledge impacts comprehension. And the big takeaway here is that the more we read aloud, the more that we offer kids background experiences and knowledge outside of their own, which then serves as a as a springboard for comprehension. So that stuff is all relatively logical, relatively familiar. We also know that sharing books aloud impacts those foundational skills of things like phonological awareness or kids' sound structure, their ability to attend to the sound structure of English. This is a hot off the press meta-analysis. And if you're not, a big statistician or familiar with that, a meta-analysis is sort of a compilation of all of the research out there and then takes all of these studies to show and measure the overarching impact. And what you can see here is that the effect size is the measure of how powerful this impact of sharing books is quite high for phonological awareness skills. Sort of one of those things that hasn't always been clearly documented, just came out in Reading and Writing Quarterly. So we also know that when kids are exposed to read alouds, they get the brain activation and the language development portions of the brain that are so essential. So let's dig in there a little bit with some brain scans that come from that same researcher behind the video that I showed you, John Hutton. So what you see here is a preschooler who is read to, and I should caution that it's a little misleading that when we look at brain scans, we're not really in education, we're not really looking at an individual scan. We're not that sophisticated yet. We're really looking at sort of an aggregate of many kids. So this isn't just Johnny, who is a preschooler. This is a series of many Johnnies who have been brought together to study the patterns. So what we see here, though, is that a group of preschooler, their brains who are read to, we see activation and growth and neural development as reflected in white matter in the areas of the brain that serve as the networks for the later reading brain. So those language and literacy areas that we will get even more explicit in growth in as kids get explicit reading instruction. So pretty self-explanatory, but look at the difference. Here we see a kid who, same age group, but this is a kid who doesn't have those read alouds, but instead spends a significant amount of time on devices, be it a tablet or game console or what have you. And what we see here, this is a little, I sometimes hear this when people will say, well, what brain scans show about struggling readers is that they use more of the brain, and people sort of take the more to mean better. More here is not better, more here is disorganized. So what you see here is the blue, we're activating all of these areas of the brain as opposed to really priming and really activating the portions of the brain that are then the foundations for language and literacy neural networks. So more here is not better, more is disorganized, underdeveloped. We know that children who are read to model that behavior. This came from a friend of mine who sent me, he lives in New York City. He had just taken his kid to the Central Park Zoo back in the day when they used to have polar bears, and he lined up all of his stuffed animals in size and read aloud to them a book. Actually, if you were to look at the pages, you would see it is a book about polar bears. And what we know is that kids who are read to model that behavior. So here we get into some of the science that is new and probably pretty surprising to you. You can see the citations 2021 and 2019. We've long known the cognitive, socio-emotional, linguistic benefits of read alouds. We're now starting to see some physiological benefits. So let me talk through two specific studies. The first one coming out of my alma mater, I went to UVA for grad school for my PhD in reading development, and a neonatal intensive care unit nurse created this study. She saw that the mothers who had babies who were sent to the NICU, there's a pretty high correlation between mothers who their babies go into the NICU and those mothers then having postpartum, high levels of postpartum depression. And it makes sense, you know, if your baby is in an incubator with all these wires and tubes like we've all seen on Grey's Anatomy and such, you are less likely to sort of experience the joy of taking your child home. It's very stressful, it's very traumatic. And so she was actually trying to create a system of support for parents as opposed to babies. And what the findings were pretty surprising. So with the intention of helping these mothers avoid postpartum depression and give them a way to interact with their babies, she created a reading garden. So what she was finding is that mothers didn't really know what to say to their baby as it was in an incubator. It's medically fragile. You know, how much can I talk to it? And so she said, why don't you just read to it? Because it's all about oral language development. So she created 3 levels in this reading garden. She had babies who were really, really medically fragile, babies that were, you know, 20-ish weeks, 30-ish weeks. They were, you know, under 4 pounds, very medically fragile, all the way up to babies who were more robust. They were about to be discharged and go home. So the babies who were really medically fragile were whisper read to in short durations, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. The babies who were almost ready to go home were read to at a normal volume and frequency. So they were read to for about a half an hour, just like you would read to any child at home. And what she found, a powerful reduction of postpartum stress for parents, and all of the mothers and fathers and caregivers who were surveyed afterwards said that they could plan to continue to reading aloud to their children. But here was the cool takeaway. Babies, their oxygen rates increased and their heart rates decreased, meaning they met levels of medical homeostasis, sort of this calming, your, you know, biomechanical system being hitting sort of comfort level. And what they found was the increase in oxygen and the decrease in heart rate increase, sort of showing sort of a relaxation and homeostasis. It lasted for up to 45 minutes on these babies after the read aloud. So literally physiological changes. This other amazing study looked at children who were hospitalized for chronic conditions. These were kids who were at places like St. Jude's. So they were there for, you know, cancer treatments and all of these horrible experiences that were not just a, you know, you're doing an overnight in the hospital. They were there for some duration of time. And all of the children who are read to reported lower levels of pain. They didn't change at all how much pain killers they were giving or anything medically, but children themselves, these are 8-year-old kids, reported that then when they listened to somebody read aloud, they had less pain. And I love this quote because it talks about how read alouds can take a really scary place and elicit positive physiological and psychological changes. Super cool. And if you're not convinced quite yet, we can look to the American Academy of Pediatrics, same organization who tells us when kids should get which vaccines, when we should move from rear-facing car seats to forward-facing car seats. They so value the role of read alouds that they're a part of this position statement. And I know organizations like Reach Out and Read do so much good work about helping family care providers and pediatricians books and talk about the role of reading. But not only do children physiologically benefit from read alouds, adults do as well. Brand new study that shows that when adults who have respiratory chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, when they read aloud, they have better expiratory pressure rates. So you as well experience physiological benefits from read alouds. But what we know doesn't always align with what is necessarily happening. We know that children associate read alouds with pleasure. We know that most people enjoy reading aloud, but we know that the numbers are actually kind of declining. So let me show you some of the science right now around what we're seeing with regard to read alouds. And I will say that here, this data mostly comes from school-based, so teacher read alouds. But I think there's a lot of similarities between teacher read alouds and literacy centers or work that you all are doing and text choice and such. So we know from surveys, a 2022 study, that fiction texts by far dominate what we are reading aloud, and that when choosing a book to read aloud, most adults gravitate towards older books. And I mean the classic books, the books that we grew up on, Corduroy and Runaway Bunny and all of those books, that the average text that was read aloud was 25 years old. And in no way am I disparaging those beloved books, but it also sort of helps us think through, okay, well, what intentionality are we using to choose some of the newer texts as well? You can see here that fiction texts continue to dominate. There are a very small percentage of bilingual books, a tiny percentage of nonfiction texts, which we'll get to in a minute. Again, happy to share this data as well. And this specific study looked at pre-K, early childhood teachers. And what really interested in me is that with only about a handful of books, about 15 books that were read aloud were within the last 5 years of publication. And most of the holiday books were books that were Christian focused or American focused. So sort of some of that Eurocentric text selection. We also know that most people don't intentionally plan their read alouds. And what I mean here is that they choose a book and then they go read it, rather than choosing a book, thinking about its instructional opportunities. What am I going to do to sort of make the most of this read aloud? And what happens when those read alouds are not really planned with intentionality is we miss instructional opportunities. We know that the questions that people ask tend to be those surface level questions, recall questions, clarification questions, as opposed to some of the more cognitively rich questionings. We elicit more surface level responses from kids when we don't intentionally plan those read alouds. So we'll ask, remind me, where did the boy go next? Or things like simple summarizations. As opposed to going really a level deeper with some of those things. So the big takeaway here is, how can we move past those surface level plannings and really plan read alouds with intentionality so that we maximize their opportunities? If you're not super familiar with the science of reading, or if you've heard one of this term, there's so much misrepresentation of what it is. I am pulling from the Reading League. The Reading League is a professional organization based out of Syracuse, New York, that was founded on the premise that too many teachers in their graduate and undergraduate teacher preparation certification programs did not get enough instruction about reading. And so it is inviting people back wherever they are in their career to learn more about how the brain learns to read. And when you open up most newspapers or sort of mass media coverage of the science of reading, they really sort of narrowly focus on phonics and decoding. And there's a whole lot of conversation about the reading wars and this sort of time of conflict. And I don't really want to get into that, but I do want to clarify that the science of reading, what it is it is a long-standing body of research. We're talking 50 years old. It is not a new thing. It's not a new trend. It's not a new fad. The amount of coverage in podcasts and documentary films and social media and, CNN and USA Today, all of that feels new, but the science is long-standing. It is a body of research, so it is high quality research across many languages and many disciplines. So really trying to clarify what the science of reading is. It is not just phonics, it's not just decoding. And when we talk about the science of reading, you'll often see this infographic created in 2001 by Hollis Scarborough. She actually, fun fact, sketched it in black and white on a cocktail napkin one night after, reading researchers go wild at a conference. And she sketched out Scarborough's reading rope. And what she meant to depict is how many components go into skilled reading. You'll notice that phonics and decoding are really a small portion of all of the components that are necessary to become a skilled reader. So what do we do? What is the space for read alouds in the science of reading? I argue that you can't get to those top strands, the language comprehension strands, the blues, the greens, the purples, without a read aloud. So when we talk about language comprehension, what we mean is the ability to understand written and spoken language. Word recognition being lifting the word off the page, language comprehension being I have the skills and understanding to make sense of that. And read alouds are so essential in this component. Let's take background knowledge and vocabulary specifically. So one of the things that I just find fascinating is the amount of sophisticated words that go into relatively simple picture books. I love the expression that picture books serve as lexical reservoirs. And what we know is that when we read aloud to children, we provide them exposure to words that they may not hear outside of that read aloud. Screenshot of a very simple book, Pizza by William Steig. Very simple book. Pete is a little boy, wants to go outside and play. You can see he's got his baseball glove and ball ready to go, but it's rainy outside, so he has to stay inside. One sentence that I might read to preschoolers. Pete's father can't help but noticing how miserable his son is. 2 sophisticated vocabulary words in that one text. Noticing and miserable. Now, would my kids hear those if I were a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or even an 8-year-old? Unlikely to hear them in the language that they are exposed to on a daily basis. Most kids, their language interactions come from TV and just being around adult conversation. And what we know is that children's books intentionally have more sophisticated vocabulary selection than the language that kids are exposed to on a daily basis. So huge reason in the science of reading to include read alouds is vocabulary exposure. So knowing the essential role, what are we going to do to make the most of our read alouds? And here are my 5 favorite ideas that I like to share. And we will go through each one of these. So let's start with resisting the decline at 9. Reading aloud at all grades. And that book cover that you saw at the beginning, the book that I wrote, has a specific focus on reading aloud pre-K through grade 8. Not just in a school day in the reading and writing block, but during math class and social studies and even PE and all those times, because of the importance of read aloud. So let's look at what I mean by the decline at 9. So we know that when kids get older, their age increases, their read alouds decrease, both at home and at school. So the Scholastic teachers and principals report, if you're not familiar with those 2, Scholastic, everyone knows them for, Clifford and their book fairs and such, but they also have a pretty robust research body. And if you haven't taken advantage of their reports that come out every 2 years, they're really thoughtfully done and do a really nice job of surveying. I think it's usually about 3,000 kids and families, and you can download them for free. But we know that most kids, when they get to 4th grade and up, teachers are not reading aloud to them. Well, what about at home? And here's where we see the decline at 9. So take a look at the chart and you'll see the decline at 9 is the idea that parents and caregivers stop reading to kids when they're about 9 years old, typically 3rd-ish, 4th-ish grade. The assumption most parents and caregivers make is, they can read it on their own, or read alouds, that's just a thing for when they're little. They don't want me to read aloud. They can read to themselves. They don't need it. And what we know from the other report where kids were surveyed is that most kids say, I wish my parent had continued to read aloud to me. So the tendency is at 3rd and 4th-ish grade at home and at schools, read alouds decline, but kids want them. So we have to be conscious of that decline at 9 and actively push against it and continue to read aloud, because kids are reporting that they wish their teachers and parents kept reading aloud to them. And you can see some of the reasons that parents and kids like read alouds. Again, I will make a plug for the Scholastic reports. You can download infographics like this, really powerful to share with your network as well. The majority of kids enjoy that one-on-one interaction or small group interaction if they're reading with their siblings, but just being conscious of our tendency to stop those read alouds right around age 9. Now that we know the trend, we can actively resist it. So tip number 2, don't show the pictures. So we all know if we've done a read aloud, you sit and you make sure that you can see the text, and then you show it to everybody, and then you'll inevitably have a kid who said, wait, I didn't see it. One of my favorite things to do is intentionally not show kids the pictures at first. Why do I do this? Well, it encourages kids to use visualization and a comprehension strategy where they become metacognitive, they think about their own thinking, and they build mental imagery. It also promotes a longer attention span and more engagement with the text, because what we know from eye tracking software, which literally looks at the gaze patterns of kids, that their attention is going right to the illustration. And when they're so hyper-focused on the illustration, they may lose some of that oral language exposure. So what do? I give kids a heads up. I promise I'm going to show you the picture, because if you don't, they'll all freak out. So you got to preempt it and say, first, I want you to listen to the words. As you listen to the words, I want you to make a movie in your head. What's it look like? And as adult readers, we've all had the experience of reading a book and then we go watch the film. We're like, no, that's not how I saw the character in my head, or he didn't look like that, or that scene didn't look like this. Well, those are conversations that we want to encourage with kids. So I give them a heads up. I'm not going to show you right away, but let me hear, what are your ideas? Maybe if you've got older kids, you could say, go sketch it. Show me that through crayons or art supplies. Draw that image, draw that picture, draw that movie. And then after we've generated their ideas, we can have rich conversations about similarities and differences like we as adult readers do. But again, giving them I'm not going to show you the pictures. And it doesn't work for every text. This is where we have to know the text and search for texts that have really really juicy language, that really are descriptive and help generate those ideas. And then we show them the picture. So similarly, knowing that kids tend to look at illustrations, well, when we are doing a read aloud and kids are looking just at the illustrations, they are missing some of the instructional opportunities. They are missing the opportunity to have what's called a print salient read aloud. And this idea comes from researchers who studied what happens when we explicitly draw kids' attention to print. They use a technique called print referencing. And all we do here, this is for the kids who are 3 to 5 or 6-ish. We show them the forms and functions of print explicitly. And what we know is that when we do it, and I'll show you how to do it in a second, we see significant gains. This statistic just is mind-boggling, that when we do print referencing for short bursts, kids make significant gains on how often they focus on the, not just the illustrations, but the print itself. So in this picture here, we might say, wow, I noticed those words are in capital letters. I noticed those words are in red. I noticed there's an exclamation point. Why do you think they did that? So that is print referencing. We're helping them understand why those words, what the message behind those words, why they were conveyed that way. So there are so many different levels of print referencing that we can do. So let's take a look at, on the far right, Knuffle Bunny, we might draw their attention to the letters in the signs, because most of our illustrations also have print in them. What is that? I'll read that sign to you. Why do you think that sign has letters on it? So a 3-year-old might be able to say, the sign is going to tell them where to go. In the spot book, you see the illustration of the kids in the piano, of the animals by the piano, a speech bubble. This speech bubble shows me when a character is talking. And in the growing vegetable soup book above, you see that the popsicle sticks, what do you think the words on the popsicle sticks might say? So here's how to do it with all levels of sophistication. We might ask kids to count words, because for young kids, most kids develop what's called a concept of word, the idea that words are discrete units with white space around them. It's a watershed literacy event. It moves you from emergent reading to beginning reading. And for most kids, it's about 4-ish, 5-ish. So we might count words on the page. You might take one of those fun finger pointers. At Halloween, when we give out those, witches' fingernails, I love having kids use those. We might do fly swatters and cut out a little window of the fly swatter and use that to track. Or I might just have a kid, put your finger on my finger, watch and help me count the words. We might point out speech bubbles and exclamation points and questions, or environmental print, things like signs. At a really young age, I might show my kids, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, this is the front of the book. I'm going to read from top to bottom. And when I reach the end of the line, I'm going to sweep my finger to the next line. That's early literacy for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. We have to not just model it, but explicitly point it out and verbalize it. For older kids, 4-ish, 5-ish, we might say, point to a letter on this page that has the same letter as your first name. Or point to a long word, point to a short word. And let me show you, I believe I have this, let's see if this works, a video of a 2.5-year-old who has had print referencing and what she's able to do.
Wow! Big and play! Wow! Taxi! Wow!
Yeah, Cal, can you point to the letter U on that page? Good job.
Wow! Hello! Daisy. That's Daisy. Look, see? Right there.
Yeah.
Daisy orange. Wow! Wow! Fly truck.
Alka, can you find the letter C on that page?
C. Where's C, Mama?
Look on the bus.
There's that C.
You got it. Can you find the letter U?
U.
Can you find the letter S?
Wow. Wow, dinosaur.
Al?
Mama, I got no U.
No letter U on that page?
Oopsie, no U. P A R X.
Close, it's a K.
Oh, sorry. X. Yeah.
Good girl.
All right, so let me stop there. So 2.5 years old, we see so many literacy actions and behaviors from the way this child, who happens to be my child, that was she's now 13 and hates me because that's what 13-year-old daughters do. But you can see that she has had print referencing. So she understands that there is an illustration. She understands that the words and the letters convey meaning. You see her differentiate print, what that is on the illustration versus on the bus, on the text. She's not reading the book, quote unquote, when it gets to this is I'm blanking on the title of this book, but really great for emergent readers. You can see that she's been modeled intonation because she knows that you get to an exclamation point and you express excitement. All of those things with 2.5 years old. She self-corrects when she gets to park, P-A-R-K, which makes sense. You know, K and X visually look pretty similar, and she goes back and self-corrects. That's print referencing. So normally what kids do is they just look at the illustration. But when we point out all of these forms and all of the functions that exist on the page, be it a short word or a long word, or where do I start? Here's a question mark that shows me this is a question. Or I point out to me where I read, point to the picture versus the word. So there's what I love about print referencing is there's this whole sort of ladder of complexity. You can start really easy, like top versus bottom, print versus illustration. And then when kids are 5 and 6, point to a lowercase letter that you have in your name. Point to, you know, whatever. So there's this whole nice level of sophistication. And again, happy to share some of the resources around that. My next tip, and this doesn't happen at home and it doesn't happen at school nearly as much as it could. So I intentionally pointed out, just like the decline at 9, once we are aware of the trend, we can push against it. And that is to read from informational text. And as what I mean by informational text, we all sort of, when I was a kid and I went to the school library, and my school librarian, Mrs. Ritter, I still remember her name, she taught me that there were 2 types of books, fiction and nonfiction. Well, we've moved past that a little bit. Now we know that there are subgroups or subcategories. And what I mean by informational text is a slice of nonfiction that is kind of like information overload. It's text that is timeless. There are verbs, there's no narrative structure, so there's no beginning, middle, and end. I could pick page 86 and read it without having read page 23. It tends to be social studies, science. And what we know is that teachers don't read to it very often, don't read aloud from informational text very often, nor do parents. But then what happens is kids get to school and they are expected to use informational text. So what we have to help do, especially the families and communities that we are working with, is use informational text. Choose it, use it, relate it to their everyday lives. So we can relate it to their everyday lives by, I remember when my kid was 4 or 5, we had a winter that had a lot of snow, and we would sit every morning and watch for the snow plows to come. Well, we then went to the library, and believe it or not, there's a whole slew of books about snow plows. This one has a C curve and that one has a whatever. That's informational text and relating it to their everyday life. So how do I like to use it? I like to connect informational text to whatever my kids are naturally curious about. One summer I was looking up at the sky with my niece. She was maybe 6 years old. I pointed out the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, and she turned to me and said, well, where's the Medium Dipper? And great question, right? I said, that's a really good question. Let's put it on a sticky note and put it in the parking lot. So in my house, we had a parking lot, which is literally the back of a broom closet. And those questions that either I hadn't had my coffee or didn't know how to answer it, I would write them down on a sticky note. And the next time we went to the library, we would open up that broom closet and say, hey, let's look for books that answer some of these questions. And then we would go choose, do you still want to know why there's no Medium Dipper? Maybe they had moved on from that question and wanted another one. So it's a nice way to honor those questions that kids ask and connect it to informational text. So you see here, I was working with a kid who kept his questions, his parking lot questions, in his journal. And then what I helped him and his mother do is, his mother said to me, when I take him to the library and he goes right for the DVDs, how do I get him engaged in choosing books? And so we would say, all right, he has to choose 3 of his sticky notes that he wants to find out answers to at the library before he can go choose the DVDs. And so it really gave him a connected way between what the kids were actually wanting to know and finding a book to answer them. So that informational text. I'm going to probably hold off on getting to this one because I don't think we'll have enough time about background knowledge, other than just giving you the teaser that background knowledge and funds of knowledge, how important they are to comprehension. And I know that's like, I'm going to tell you a little bit and then like leave you wanting more. Happy to do another one of these events. But I do want to sort of leave some time for questions. And actually, before I leave time for questions, if you're not familiar with this book, The Enchanted Hour by Megan Cox Gurdon, there's a typo on my thing. She is a Washington Post journalist who wrote a memoir of her reading aloud life. So she has 5 children and she talks about reading to them at all ages, and how connected them as a family. And she intermixes brain research. And she is just a beautiful writer. So Megan Cox Gurdon, The Enchanted Hour, you can get it at a bookstore or your public library. And she writes, it would be a mistake, though, to relegate reading aloud solely to the realm of childhood. The deeply human exchange of one person reading to another is, in fact, human, which means that its pleasures and benefits are open to everyone. And what I love here is that she is, again, helping us push past that decline at 9. There's actually some pretty interesting research now being done with showing the physiological benefits of reading aloud to senior citizens and those with neurodegenerative diseases. So like super cool. And knowing that the exchange of one person reading to another is pleasurable and beneficial for all, I'm going to end by reading aloud to you. And I want to read aloud this gorgeous poem that a friend sent to me. And I think it's really appropriate as we head into a season which really is at its very essence all about joy. So let me read this poem, Joy Chose You by Donna Ashworth. Joy does not arrive with a fanfare on a red carpet strewn with the flowers of a perfect life. Joy sneaks in as you pour a cup of coffee, watching the sun hit your favorite tree just right. And you usher joy away because you're not ready for it. Your house is not as it must be for such a distinguished guest. But joy cares nothing about your messy home or your bank balance or your waistline, you see. Joy is supposed to slither through the cracks of your imperfect life. That's how joy works. You cannot invite her. You can only be ready when she appears, and hug her with meaning, because in this very moment, joy chose you. So I hope that you have joy in the work that you do to give books and literacy culture to your families and communities, and wish you a season of lots of joy, and look forward to hearing about how joy will choose you. So let me open up for questions. And I will also share my contact information as well. But feel free to reach out if you've got questions.
Molly, there's one question that was earlier on from your presentation from Lauren Wagman. The point about not showing the pictures is intriguing to her. Is this recommendation geared towards a specific age group?
I don't think it has to be. I think especially as kids get into older age groups, the more descriptive, flowery language is really powerful to have kids make that mental image. And again, choosing a text, like my kid was just reading The Hunger Games, which is really, really descriptive. And then of course we watched the movie and we had those. Well, that's not how the character looked in my head. That's mental imagery. And we want to make sure that we're doing that not just with young children, but all the way up as texts get more sophisticated. And there's some pretty convincing evidence about, in data that I'm happy to share, about the power of visualization as a comprehension strategy. And it also helps kids as they get into other subject areas. The more you can visualize, then think about how that looks with, were you a person that when you were in math, you had to like draw out the word problem to help you understand it? That's visualization. It's a comprehension strategy and a learning strategy.
Lots of praise. Y'all can unmute and ask a question if you don't want to type it in the chat as well.
And I'm being asked about the sharing the PowerPoint. Yeah, I will get it to Emily and Amy. I know that in the National Book Access Association forum, some of my writing and some of the research has been available that way. So it's sort of like a closed kind of network and an advantage for membership. So I think that would be a nice way to do it. And another reason to become an active member in the association.
Awesome. Yeah, we're still figuring out the best places to put things. I think for one place, I'll put it right in the event information for the members. So it'll be attached to the event. That's what we're kind of doing with the conference. But this was super awesome. I want to share that my son told me that he's a senior and they're reading Jane Eyre, and the teacher read the last 2 chapters of Jane Eyre out loud. I was very proud of that. And I said, what did you think of Mr. Rochester? And he said, he's kind of a jerk. I was like, good, okay. So anyhow, any last questions before we part with Molly today?
And of course, feel free to reach out. And if you're interested in NBook Deserts and showcasing your work, happy to hear from you as well.
Oh, that's a lovely offer. That's really, because we have some great organizations on this today. I do want to let everybody know who is a member here, which I think most of you are at this point, at least a friend member. The December meeting is a full member meeting. So it's going to be a big meeting. We're going to talk about how we go through elections for this organization of the steering committee and the leadership, because this is a membership driven organization and we want everybody's voice and input, and we want lots of on-ramps for you to be able to share your knowledge, as Molly has so wonderfully done with us today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.